not sent out an email in a little while about the video links, just simply because we had kind of stopped our study and I hadn't really been. I was actually going to email something out for this last night, and I just didn't get to it. By the time I forgot and walked away from my computer. So any emails that I've sent you in the past have links to videos. It's going to take you to YouTube. If you go to YouTube, you can become a subscriber, number one, to the channel that I have, which now has all these videos posted on it. Or you can just go to YouTube and you can look up Philip Taylor. But more than likely, if you just do that, you're going to find a professional dart player from the UK that is extremely arrogant. And when he throws the dart and gets a bullseye, he gets right up in his opponent's face and screams and yells, and he's all happy. So he's kind of entertaining to watch periodically. Yeah. I was expecting the comments. I thought it'd come more from Joe.
I was going to say, how do we get the arrogant Jew?
You go tattoo it.
So, but yeah, you can just go online and check out any of the videos there and see stuff that we, if you missed a week or if you just want to go back and look at other things. The website itself that I just showed you, if you click on the residence tab and then you click on my picture, there's also a little window there that opens up one of 3 videos, which are the first videos I did. And actually, I've done that teaching in here since I did those videos. Those videos are related to Genesis chapter 6 and some stuff that we've covered in here before, basically the building of the ark and some other things. And those are videos that I filmed in my home that I lived in Akron, Ohio before we moved out here. But if you were to follow that to the YouTube page or click on YouTube from that, you'd be able to either become a subscriber and just go through the other videos I have uploaded. Unfortunately, just as a reminder for anybody watching, I'm making sure now that it should be recording audio with no issue, but for some reason at the end of March, I don't know exactly what happened, but somehow the setting on this program switched over to a default microphone that didn't exist on the computer, and it wasn't recording the audio, and I didn't catch it for possibly 3 or 4 videos. So you may run into that problem if you try and catch the last 2 chapters of Mark. So anyway, I wasn't sure, like I started to say at the beginning of today, I wasn't sure if I was going to necessarily send out this teaching as quickly as possible as I have, because I am working on a new study for us that will take place it starts right at the end of chapter 20, which is right after the commandments are given, and goes into several other things from just kind of various topics that I've chosen to pull out related to the Torah and Torah commandment or instruction. There's going to be a lot of New Testament stuff, I think, that's going to make its way, obviously, into this teaching as well. But as I've been putting it together and I selected all the subjects, I found, it doesn't surprise me, but I found that it was following a theme which is really the heart of the theme that I'm trying to bring to this facility. I'm trying to bring to what we do here, which is how do we refine our character, how do we refine ourselves, and get to a point where we are effective in community and effective in the community of the body of believers to help each other mature, to grow. How do we get to that point? That is just the underlying goal that I have personally of anything I teach. And any medium or vessel that I use to teach who Yeshua is, that I want that to be my goal. Ultimately, is that anything we're learning or I'm teaching is about, how do we get to know him at another level? How do we increase our walk with him, or our maturity in our walk with him? So hopefully, I don't know if we'll necessarily get through all of this today. Our discussion will be as liberal as we want it to be, but I have some other things too related to the 10 Commandments that we can look at. I'm just going to start off, before we really get into some of this and just start reading through it, I'm just going to start off just by doing a little bit of talking and just asking some questions. And these questions that I'm going to ask are questions that I heard Rabbi Kiva Tatz has a teaching online referred to as honor and coveting, I think, or whatnot. But his whole discussion and talk in that particular video is about the 10 Commandments. And he starts off by asking some questions. And I don't even recall that he necessarily gives full answers to any of them, but just something like, why 10? What do we see as the significance, perhaps?
What?
Why 10? Why 10 commandments? Why 10 words or 10 instructions? And what do we think that means? And he goes on further to even ask some other questions, and why do they seem to be set apart? So, anybody want to initially volunteer or write a wrong answer?
Why 10?
Yeah,
Because that's what God decided to do.
that's
You
simple,
can
right?
count them on your
That's
hands.
good enough for me.
Because you got 10
You
fingers?
got 10
At
fingers.
least most of us do. Joe might be
Sorry,
missing.
Jeff.
Joe might have 9 and a nub or something.
Well, that one's only required then.
I call them commandments for dummies, because there's only 10 of them and it's easy to remember.
Because 5 fit on a tablet easier than 6? I don't know.
You mean that's the limit of human comprehension, huh?
Yeah.
If we had 11, we'd forget at least one.
So,
10, I can remember all 10.
Oh.
You trying to say what the mind of God is? I don't answer that.
Well, there's obviously some different special things that are about these too. Specifically, when we ask what the 10 is, we can oftentimes think that, and you probably all at one time or another heard it said, that these are perhaps the greatest or the more important or the more legitimate to focus on, or they are the 10 out of the rest that are the more overriding perspective. And I think that specifically, even considering the 10th of the 10, we could find more that would be a little bit more significant. Coveting is, even by rabbinical commentary or by to say scholarly commentary, there is the idea that to even look at, your neighbor's belongings and to look at things this way, is an issue. And I think that there could be, a little bit more detrimental things to society. The way in which we interact with people is obviously more deadly. We have a lot of crimes that take place, some of which aren't mentioned within the 10 Commandments, like rape or whatnot. So you would think that some of these things, kidnapping, some of these things would be a little bit more pertinent. So one idea that's suggested is that they are how do I term it correctly? They are fundamental as a category from which all of the things flow. And specifically, if you really needed to categorize things, you could see that all the sin that we have, the sin that we may have in our lives or see that exists in the world, would be able to find its way into one of these categories. And at the root, you need to understand, perhaps at the root, what the cause is of that sin, if you want to address it. To some extent, in our own personal character refinement, we want to address, whether or not every time we walk by a bundle of grapes in the grocery store, we grab one and eat it, which would be a form of theft. Some of us may struggle with that. Some of us may struggle with, looking at, and he brings up, as far as in the realm of coveting, he brings up something that is a great point to consider, which is if you're looking at your neighbor's item and you see that your neighbor has a nice car, he has a nice house or something of this nature, and you specifically want that item, and specifically that one item for yourself, or worse yet, you just simply don't want him to have it, that's where the issue comes in. This is where you would be, you will transgress this issue. If you just simply like that particular car and you want one like it for yourself, right, then this realm of thinking does not put you in transgression, of that particular commandment or that particular issue. So that kind of, even just thinking about it from that simplistic sense, for me, helped to try and, evaluate some of the addictive type, behaviors or whatnot that I have in my life. One thing I personally have to be real careful with are the magic cards that I collect. I've got tens of thousands of them probably sitting all different rooms of my house. I'm surprised it hasn't driven Jen crazy yet. But I've got them all over the place, and I have to be mindful and careful, of how I let that rule over me, or what I utilize that item for, or what I do with it. But in addition, as well, there are 5 on 2 different tablets that are singled out, that are written out, that Moses is given. The first set, we know he breaks, but he's given these 2 sets of tablets to bring down. And there's a little bit of a debate in the commentary on this time when Moses is at the mountain with the people, or when the people are at the mountain and they hear God speak, there's a little bit of a debate on whether or not they actually hear God's voice just speak the first 2, or whether or not they hear his voice speak all 10 before they become so fearful that they request that Moses go up on the mountain now and receive, from God the rest of the Torah, or the rest of his instruction. But I appreciate Tanya's perspective on perhaps the number of why 10. Interestingly, there is something to be said about the number 10, and there's some of you I know do or don't appreciate the idea of the numerology or whatever else, but sometimes numerology really does seem to play a part in some different ways in the scripture, and a lot of times there's a lot of themes that you can find, and the number 10 seems to definitely denote the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet as Yod, which is the smallest of all the letters. It literally means hand, and spiritually it illustrates the idea of God's presence. And in its smallness and anonymity, you usually find large things happening when God's presence is there. Even when in the smallness and anonymity, you may not see him. Dave?
I got a chart at home that has the alphabet, not only in English, but the 22 letters of the Hebrew. And in the same sounds or letters in about 12 different languages. 9 different languages, not 12. Including Phoenician, Old Hebrew, present day Hebrew, the one you're using. And Yod, for instance, is in modern Hebrew, is how you describe it, but it's not that way in Old Hebrew. The ones that the Jews used before, well, they used it off and on right up to time of Jesus, but not a lot. But I'm one of the ones that question why 10, because the number 10 is a modern device, not an ancient device.
That you're looking for something that's not there.
Accounting systems were a lot different than what you're used to.
God decided that's what he wanted to tell the people, and he told them.
That's how many there is.
There could have been 4, there could have been a dozen. It's what he decided. There's no mystery to it.
It covers a very wide range of things, both godly and true, doesn't it? Isn't there 4 for God and 6 human relations, interrelations?
That's one of the things that we'll cover and talk about, so we can get into that now.
Well, one of the things I looked into many other laws other than ceremonial involving people and God, and they all seem to be subsets of would come under one of the 10.
Say that again.
You
You
just
looked at the
announced it. You just
Yeah.
said something like, what was it you said? The relationships, the laws were not detailed enough to cover rape or something like that. Well, it does cover rape. It covers everything. The 10 Commandments cover it. It's just that we humans like to say, it doesn't cover X, Y, Z. And so they have to pass another. We have that today. How many laws does the state of Indiana have on its books? About 84,000 or something like that, I think it is. That are still applicable. 84,000. Why so many? Why not just 10 in the state of Indiana? There's
So
enough for
laws.
God. Well, we get to get picky like you did about, it doesn't say rape. And then if you have to pass a law, what kind of rape? Was it underage or elderly or older? Now we have to have 2 laws involving rape. And pretty soon we have 6 laws. And then 34 laws. All involving what? Rape. That's human, because we always get picky at tiny details in the language. That's the only, dummies. You got them to have additional laws. Didn't you?
The number 10 is the catch-all.
It does, it covers the whole 9 yards.
Number 10,
I found.
you gotta define neighbor. And you define neighbor as anybody
Seven, five, I got 4.
except who's in your house. Then number 10 covers almost anything you can think of.
Oh, see, they put this one here. Get there.
Joe?
When we're talking about number 10, just the one word, covet, is that not the same thing as think up, basically? You know, you have to think before you do anything, and that's where man fails. Because if you start looking at anything, man devises many ways to go out and steal or acquire or
Borrow.
yeah, you know, I mean, that word kind of touches everything, you know, because you have to have that thought pattern first. Because if we had no thought pattern at all, we wouldn't want it. But it's when we start excessively wanting over a certain item that then it goes into action.
Yeah, possessiveness is definitely a good word that comes into mind to help us understand and discern specifically in that. And it also is a matter of ownership. That's why I talk about that all the time and understanding, because oftentimes we want to appropriate something, or worse yet, we just do even unconsciously.
And if, you know, to further this out and stuff, you know, someone they see their neighbor with a car, whatever, they want one of those. Normally, once they acquire it, and however they acquire it and covet, you know, and come up with the whole thing, then it's kind of lost at that point in time in their mind. It's not as big of a deal. So the word covet is a stronger word than what a lot of people could look at, you know, or think of and stuff.
Covet is strong desire.
Yeah,
That's what it is, strong desire.
yeah. And once you covet it, you've obtained your desire, and then that coveting effect kind of falls wayside for that point. Unless you want one with sunroof or something.
Yeah.
Then you're
I think that we have to have a little bit of a definition of understanding, you know, the covetousness and what that leads to or what it means. To just define coveting as strong desire doesn't necessarily do justice to what it means to have a strong desire to serve God, although having a strong desire to serve can lead into, you know, serving oneself rather than serving neighbor or serving God. So, I mean, we do have to be mindful, right, in our maturity as we grow. We have to make sure we process correctly. But I think in a way, the way I'm kind of seeing and hearing the idea of covetousness would be the same way we would translate or look at the word faith. You know, it's not intended just to be simply a blind belief alone, but faith is better translated as a faithfulness. You know, what are you doing with the knowledge that you possess? What are you doing with the energy and the activeness and the, you know, the strength, the desire that you possess? You know, what direction are you pointing it? You know, what are you doing with it? That does make a huge difference. Back to Dave's point, we can use to get into some of our discussion up front about the 10 Commandments. Some do say and believe that the first 4 only are the ones that are directly related to our relationship with God, where the last 6 are with men. But it's actually 5 and 5. I know this may sound strange, but the 5th commandment, and they are also interrelated to one another. We'll talk about that as we go through the study, but I'll just give you a little bit of insight now so that you have the last one. The 5th commandment is to honor parents, honor mother and father. And oftentimes when we end up in, or we know people who have had issues with their parentage, things that have happened, some legitimate issues of anger that people may have from things that have happened to them because of parents, we can tend to lean into not necessarily having faith or trust in God and Him having chosen and provided for us something we had no control over, which is where we would be born and who our parents would be. And this is why this is on the realm of relationship with God and not relationship with people. Obviously, honoring parents is a relationship with people. But doing so even when they have not earned that honor and doing it in regards to God is oftentimes a God and man relationship, right? Because the requirement is still there for those that have been in a situation where perhaps they need to have separation.
Couldn't you say that about all of them? No.
I don't think so.
That
Because you can't.
reasoning applies to all of them to me.
I don't think you can murder God. So I wouldn't say that murder, I wouldn't say that adultery, I wouldn't say that those things are related to relationship with God as directly as that one particularly is.
I could destroy the relationship of another person with God by deliberate effort. That's not good, that's wrong.
No, that's certainly not good. So there is an interrelationship. You know, the first one is connected to the sixth one. The second one is connected to the seventh one. And that's part of what this study would be, is to look at some of that. We can talk about it as we go through, I believe.
Back to the commandments themselves. You know, I find it a little strange here how you've chosen to break my heart, because, you know, the first sentence of commandment number 2 that you've got is always to me been commandment number 1. Commandment number 1 is you shall have no other gods before me. The thing you're calling number 1 isn't a commandment, it's just some statement.
Yes, I know in our contemporary Christianity, that's definitely what we've been taught. That's been our perspective. That's the way that they're ordered here is the way the Jews order them.
Well,
Number
Never
one.
taught me that. I learned it on my own.
the first thing
I'm not sure which you were referring to,
the thing
Dave.
you call number 1 isn't a commandment. It's just
I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. You seem to think that's number 1. No, we don't.
That's not a commandment.
I'm understanding that, Dave.
Well, it is. It's part of the commandment that you didn't finish it.
So they are listed by the Jews and the way they hold them. If I had brought my Chumash in, I could have read you some of that commentary. But they hold that the first is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And the number one reason would be that many people cannot get past the first commandment to believe that God exists. And that He is the one who frees you from captivity.
What's your board up there say? I can't read it from here.
What board?
Your 10 Commandment board. What's it say number 1 in?
Thou shalt have no other
Yeah, more
gods
than
before
likely
me.
it's the traditional.
Well, it's not traditional. It's every place I've ever seen till I just saw this.
Well, that's not surprising because there's a lot of other things. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny, but a lot of other things you heard for the first time in here too.
Take that numbering system we have in there. We have, what is it? I'm in Exodus 20. Oh, yeah. Then God spoke all these words, saying, and then we have the number 2. Now that was put there by man. In the old Hebrew Bible, there was no 2 there. It was just a continuing sentence. That's what he said. Take away this numbering system. You have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. We put them in there for convenience of locating, separating information out.
You seem to be talking about something different than what he was talking about.
Well, it's the same thing because I just expanded what he said.
Well, I think most people
He
know that
says
the chapter
this,
and verse numbers
I
are
am
not
the Lord your
originally
God
the
who
text.
brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me.
That's number 1.
That's number 1.
Which you
But
put.
you got 2 and 3
Because in your
separating them. So
and so to speak directly, that's because in your contemporary Christian understanding and teaching that you've seen, that's what you're accustomed to. All I'm telling you, and I'm not, you can argue with me if you like, all I'm telling you is that the Jews themselves have numbered them this way, and I chose to go with that numbering. If neither one of you have seen that before, I don't know how much more we need to talk about to get past it, but
what Jews
either take it or leave it.
which the Old Testament we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the words are all here. This is
Like
where you
50
break.
Hebrew.
So the question would be, if anything, rather than debating whether or not your sensibilities have been impacted by the idea of me numbering them in a way you don't like, rather than talking about that, let's talk about what would be the significance of it, and then you judge for yourselves whether or not you want to keep it that way, or you'd like to go back to the way you think it should be numbered. In the first instance, if we understand that God is the one who freed us, I am the Lord your God who has freed you from the land of Egypt. If we recognize that as the first of the commandments, and you look at a connecting verse, what is the sixth one? Thou shalt not murder, right? So when you murder an individual, you are literally removing, banishing from the world a potential divine spark and another human being who's been created in God's image and who exists. And when we deface his image, right, when we murder another human being, that's in a sense what we're doing. If we look at the second commandment as not having any other gods that we bow down to in front of him, and you look at the seventh, you shall not commit adultery, you can see that the connection is there for not adulterating yourself, your relationship, not putting forth someone else first. So we'll get to the rest of that here in a moment. Let me start off by reading the rest of page 1. I'll read all the commandments in general. This is verses 1 through 17. This is from the New American Standard. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, a pesel, or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness, hesed, to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Yeah,
So, to get
simple. Just don't do any of those things, you're all set, right?
To get to answering your guys' question, many various denominations and religious groups have chosen to reorder the pronouncements made by God at Mount Sinai differently. They were recorded in the Torah by Moses, just as they were spoken by God to Moses, the Israelites, and the mixed multitude of Mount Sinai. The ordering I've used here falls under the same traditional ordering used by the rabbis and the sages, God's chosen people. Yeshua was certainly aware of this same ordering. As we will see later in our study, he taught his Father's commandments with the same format. And as you can see, as we were discussing, they've been broken up. The first commandment being, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. If you can't get past, and it is listed as one of the 613.
I just scratch it out and correct it.
Sure, if you'd like. If you have a pen.
You have all the words here. It's
Well-
just where you put the punctuation.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is if you do it the way that we've learned it, you only got 9.
No, because you shall have no gods, no, not make any idols is commandment number 2.
And what's number 3?
Number 3 is what you got. All of them are the same, it's just the first sentence of number 2 should be tacked to the words of number 1.
Yes, but I'm kind of starting to see Phil's point though.
So
I
according
don't
to
know
this
their gods
traditional,
go together.
right, this is the contemporary Christian traditional. The first one is, thou shalt not have no other gods before me. And the second one is, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image.
Right.
So to Dan's point, if you put
And
those
you
two
combine-
together,
You combine those and
Yes.
call them two.
because they both deal with the same issue. They
Yeah.
deal with adultery and idol worship.
Also, the way I look at it on Google, and the 9th and 10th one both say covet. So why would you put two covets together? It's only 9 commandments that way.
So as I stated in the sentence, there are many, because you'll find the Catholics number them differently, and you'll find that other Christian denominations number them differently. Many various denominations and religious groups have chosen to reorder the pronouncements, which is actually what they're referred to as. That's why the front of your sheet says the 10 words of God, the 10 Devarim, because that's what they're referred to as, the 10 words. And so they reorder the pronouncements made by God at Sinai differently. I know this may be hard for some of you to get, but I chose to use what I believe Yeshua would have been accustomed to himself. And the first commandment was, know that God exists. Because if you can't get past that, you're not getting any of the other 9. And that's, initially, that's the most important aspect of why they'd be numbered this way. Because we are, in every rabbi that's ever commented on any of the 613 commandments, or the 10, or whatever, specifically denotes that this one commandment is one that we have to follow, obviously. I mean, you all know that that's the first thing you're looking for in an individual when you try and have interaction with them, communication and conversation. Do they even believe in God? If they don't, you're trying to prove the existence of it before you even get into any conversation about anything else. So that is obviously the first hurdle. First place we have to be. The second being, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, which is in Hebrew a pesel. There's an interesting, I didn't bring the sheet for it. There is an interesting insight to that word. A pesel actually, the word pesel meaning to build that idol, to shape or form something. The best way I could think to describe it would be, and it's kind of hard to describe, but when an individual is building something like Dick or Joe or Dave, if you guys have ever constructed something, you know that you're putting an amount of yourself into that object. And you desire to enjoy it, you desire for the person you may be building it for to enjoy it. But pesel specifically means you are putting something into that item as you're building it that is an intent to worship it, or is an intent to see it as higher or greater than something else. In other words, you're trying to esteem it.
That's how you elevate things, yeah.
So your intention in constructing it is to be higher, is to be greater. So while we're given commandments not to build and construct images of things, whether they're in the sea, they're on the earth, or they're in heaven, a child's Fisher-Price plastic cow is not an idol. You understand? The inventor that described, hopefully anyway, the inventor, the manufacturer, the company that is going through the process of building those items is not building it with an intent that people are going to put it up on a throne, elevate it to an altar, and sacrifice to it or worship it. You understand? So this is what the word is describing. Is the difference, Joe?
Back in the days when I did architectural and engineering printing, my dad, he always said, the architects are trying to make a monument to themselves. You know, in other words, they, you know, more or less look at what I designed. And it is taller, it is better looking.
Yeah.
And it withstands better, you know, and that's what they're trying to show and dominate, you know, so that's.
Joe, that's the thing we gotta be very careful about, because we can elevate those things to be much more important than things that God tells us to make important, which is starting to elevate it into the class of an idol.
That's right.
Of God.
I can say all day long that I want this place to be enjoyed by you and that I want this place to be part of your home or the house for you. But I can also get uptight, bent out of shape, thinking that all the space is mine and I get to dictate and determine and justify where things are going to be until Joe and Dick walk in and say, Phil, you have no idea what you're doing with space saving. We're going to put shelves over here. We're going to put shelves and racking over here. We're going to do all this stuff. And I can get as uppity as I want. But when I finally relinquish and relent and
She
let
wins.
go,
She wins, right?
when I finally relinquish and relent and I let go, it becomes better for me and it becomes more enjoyable, right?
So I was always taught growing up that a form of
Go on.
idol worship is almost like when you purposely. We have a lot of basketball players that live in Atlanta, you know, from all over the NBA, and so these homes were just massive monuments to themselves, basically, you know, and they had these cars that were just coated in gold everywhere, you know, so they would drive around in chariots of gold. And so we were always taught growing up that that's a form of idolatry in a way, because you're almost like elevating yourself to this level of hero worship within these people, you know, and you're inspiring a level of almost worship love in these kids. So it was interesting because like that was the approach that a lot of my deep Baptist friends always took growing up was, you know, that's one of the reasons why they justified not watching the football games, not going to the basketball games, because they didn't want their kids to idol worship players. Is that just dogma from that church, or is that a form of it? I've always wondered that.
Well, Tanya, it's in our society here in the United States. Haven't you heard somebody say, I love my car?
Oh, all the time.
Every time I hear it, I get a little bit sicker.
Yeah.
When you say you love things, it makes me to hear somebody say, I love you. If they say I love you, a person, I say that's good. That's good. I love my car. And that's us. That's around here.
But what happens when
And
I
if I go
say,
to other countries, I find they will find something equivalent to it.
Mm-hmm.
In the days of Christ, and in the days of Moses, everybody was doing it. These people are going to do it. You know what they're going to do
Next.
while he's up on a mountain.
but what happens when I say I love Christian music?
Makes me, but it's something you hear. It's not a thing that I can reach out and touch and worship.
Okay.
So you would,
I
I
don't
think
think
what
the
he's getting
issue-
at is you should rephrase it to I enjoy or I appreciate, is what I think he's getting at.
What's the difference between loving something and worshiping it?
Why,
Not much.
why do you love Christian music? Is it because it praises God? Okay, I mean, if you love the neighbor's car, is that gonna praise God? I mean, you know, so it's,
Love it or cover it?
yeah.
Which are you doing?
Yeah, I think
Love
to
them.
the degree
Love
to
them
which you do
together.
it is what's going to make the difference. I understand Dave's emphasis of really trying to put more emphasis on love and how love should be directed, where it should be aimed at, you know, what it should be saved for, you know, the reverence that we should have for God. I definitely get that point, but it depends on the perspective in which you're looking at things. If God really truly has full sovereignty over your life, and you recognize that every good thing in your life has been given to you by Him, saying that you love that He's provided that while loving the idea He can take it away as quickly as He gave it if it's necessary, is okay to some extent, I think. I mean, my Kia that I have is paid off. It's been paid off since last year, or this year, earlier this year. And I specifically, and let me tell you, I had zero problems with it. I'm at like 130, 140,000 miles on it right now. I specifically sat and was watching a TV commercial come up advertising the dealership, the Kia dealership that would have that car. I liked what I was seeing on TV. I prayed and I asked God for it and then forgot that I asked Him for it. Jen reminded me that since I had done that, I might as well just go down and try and get it. And I was given the car within not even 24 hours of going down and asking the car dealership for it, which I didn't think I'd be able to get it. And I have continued to just praise God and thank Him for that the whole time as I think about whether I need to get a new one or whether I, you know, continue to drive this one. But again, the perception, the direction, what we're doing with it. You know, the second commandment instruction talking about not shaping and forming something with your hands that you have an intent to put in front of God is the problem. And that's why this is all put together. You shall not bow down to something you have built with your hands that you intend to put up to Him. And the real danger that we have, and the older we get, the more dangerous this becomes, is that we love people that way. I don't want to speak too rudely or directly, but Jen and I in the last 5-6 years or so have seen many couples that although they were together, and I know that you and Dave have both experienced a loss recently, and I know that you guys had a strong enough relationship with God that this wasn't as much of an issue. But we have seen some couples where when one of the spouses passed, the other one was not able to survive without them. And I'm not saying that that they shouldn't grieve, and I'm not saying that there isn't loss, because I recognize that, especially when they've been married for decades. But to literally be unable to function, to not know where things are, to not be able to get by, the risk of developing that kind of relationship is to elevate your spouse above God and to allow for that person to become the reason why you went to church, the reason why you did those things.
Now, I'm in caution you, don't be careful about that judgment.
Well, it's a risk. It's a risk that we have to be mindful
You
of.
don't walk in their shoes, so you don't know what's on their mind. Be careful, be careful.
I understand, I appreciate that, but I don't think the advice that I'm giving as counsel is out of line. I think it's a risk, because I've seen many people
Yes, it
suffer,
is.
and I've seen them be in grief because of that. So to counsel people against recognizing it is, I think, good.
That's good.
You had mentioned probably last year that when we were talking about God's name and the 4 letters and everything, that one of his names is love. And I don't remember which, I'd pull it up if I could remember which one it was from. But you had made the comment a while ago, and I remember writing it down because it was the first time I had ever considered it that way, that don't take God's name in vain. But because his name is love, one of his descriptions is love, if you say, oh, I love my car, in a way, is that almost taking his name in vain? You know, because like if his name means love, then
Don't overdo it.
No.
Be careful.
No, I don't. The New Testament specifically says God is love. John says that in his letters. I think it's chapter 4. So there is some connections that can be made there, but I don't think that you're.
not going that far.
So again, when we get to the point of talking about what it means to take his name in vain, there's a specific understanding to be had about that too. So I will say, and again, I'm probably going to get hit up by Dave for sharing this point, and I didn't bring the page, but I'll go ahead and share it with you anyway. In the second commandment, we have 2 words that I bolded here, which is the word pesel, and then you have the word chesed, which is in verse 6, where God talks about showing loving kindness to generations, those who keep his commandments. One interesting facet, and I understand this is from a Babylonian text that more than likely is not necessarily the same text that may have been used to inscribe in the rocks. But understand that you have, and this is, I'm going to share this with you now and hopefully remember 2 or 3 more times over the next several weeks and keep bringing this point up, because this is going to be the main point that leads into the study I'm working on now. There are 3 ways that an individual writes on something. There is bringing one medium to another, which is ink on parchment. There is engraving, and there is literally boring through, okay, all the way through the material. And it's believed that when the 10 Commandments were given, written by the finger of God and given to Moses, that he bored all the way through the stone. Okay, this is commentary that's written about the traditional practice and belief based on having possessed broken tablets and then the new tablets that were made for some time. So interestingly, in that particular passage in the Babylonian text, there are only 2 letters in all of this, and I didn't bring the sheet with me, I should have printed it, but if you were to go through and look at all of the letters that are used out of that Hebrew text, there's only 2 letters that have a completely enclosed shape to their form. And in the Paleo script, it's the same way. These same 2 letters have an enclosed shape. That means if it was bored all the way through, it would have been a miraculous event for the stone, right? Because the commandments are not just simply the boring through of the stone, but the commandments are the light of God that shone through, because that's what gives the letters their shape, so to speak, in the stone. So it would be a miraculous event for this piece of stone and these 2 letters to be free-floating. And in these, and I tell you, if you at least were to look at and print the sheet that I have or whatnot, or if you went through and looked at all these letters in Hebrew, you would find that only 2 letters. I went through and highlighted them all, and went through and looked at everything, and only 2 letters are found to be completely enclosed like that. It's the final mem that's in, the somic that is in the word pesel and in loving kindness, pesed and pesel. So pesel, again, is designing with every bit of your character and who you are something for the purpose of elevating it higher than God. The commentary surrounding the word hesed is that God's hesed, his grace, as sometimes it's translated, his love or loving kindness, as it's more often translated as, but it's also translated as grace, is all about being fully invested in elevating you. And that's for me. And that's specifically what the text says here. So the miracle is joining these 2 things, so to speak, by displaying that this is what God really wants. He wants us to be uplifted by his loving kindness, and he wants us to uplift others, right? Because that's what would be uplifting his image. That's what that would look like. So that's why those words are bolded. That's why there's a connection there. Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Now, you know what? I totally botched telling you that story. So there was something different. I'm sorry. Out of the entire section, I totally botched telling you the wrong thing. So out of this entire section where the 10 Commandments are given, there are only 2 somics. Somic is the S sound that you hear in pesel or that you hear in hesed. Okay? So there's 2 somics. But the mem, when it's a final form, mem is a letter that normally, I don't have one on the sheet, but mem is normally a letter that has a little opening at the foot. But when it comes to the end of a word, it takes on a final form and gets completely enclosed like a square. Where a somic is a little bit rounded like a circle, right? And the mem is a square. There are 24 final mems in this passage and 2 somics. Getting into numerology again, that's a total of 26 completely enclosed letters. 26 is the numerical value of God's holy name. For me, that was something I found in reading through and then highlighting every one of the letters. So I'll try and remember to bring that sheet in next week. And have copies of it. So I'm sorry, there's only two somics, and then there's 24 mems, which is a total of 26. So there's 26 letters that are completely enclosed. So there would have been a free floating stone, so to speak, in each one.
Yeah.
So number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. You know what vanity is? Vanity is emptiness.
Where'd you get vanity?
I'm just,
Self-love, excessive self-love.
yeah. Vanity is a puffing up. It's putting as much hot air as you can fit in the balloon before it explodes. That's what it means to not take God's name in vain. Don't be so full of hot air in your view or in your usage or in your expectation. One thing that I've tried to change as much as I possibly can in my life is, and I'll be careful here what I say, is if we have a regular request when we can get angry, we can have a regular request when we get angry, of asking God to damn something. But be mindful of specifically what you're asking him to damn, right? And how you're looking at that situation. And I've tried to be as extremely mindful as I could, because for me, that was a personal issue for many, many years. Just regularly, haphazardly, getting frustrated, getting angry, and saying this. And as I've tried to mature over the years, I've tried to really be aware of what God does find to be distasteful, what he finds to be an abomination, and what he has damned, so to speak, or is called an abomination, and is set aside as only that. So, to take his name in vain, to just cast out, his name or a recognition of him haphazardly is the place we don't want to be. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it set apart. remember the Sabbath day and keep it set apart. Later, and we'll talk about this several times later, when the Ten Commandments are reiterated in Deuteronomy 5, here it says, Zikru, remember the Sabbath day. In Deuteronomy 5, it says Shamar, which means to guard and protect. We have to guard and protect that time. Recognize and remember what it means to be joined with him is an extra special opportunity of connection, to be in fellowship, and we have to be prepared to not only remember the time, but guard it and prepare for it during the week. Above and beyond anything else, that is one thing I've learned, but not learned enough, and continue to strive in on a weekly basis, is trying to remember to be prepared ahead of time when the time is coming, so that I'm not scheduling myself, so that I'm not building myself into a place of devoting that time to myself alone. I'll be open and honest with you guys and tell you that it's been a struggle for me being open as a business and collecting monetary transactions on Saturdays, on the Sabbath, for quite some time.
I've been praying for you.
Jen made a point to me that I knew was very valid and honest some time ago, and that's why I didn't argue with her. And that point was, if we did take that time off and all we used that time was for ourselves and we just sat at home and did nothing, or we played games or we did something else, would it really have been a Sabbath? And initially when we opened up, I did everything traditionally in here on a Saturday morning, for the most part, that I've done in any Messianic synagogue I've ever attended, whether it was a Friday night or a Saturday morning, which was, for the most part, we gathered together, we had a Bible study session, we had prayer, we had time of fellowship, and we ate a meal together.
Did you worship God and all that?
Yeah. And the only exception, the only difference, and to some extent I still do that. If I go to the men's group study, if men come down here after that group, if I have people fellowship in here, I used to specifically teach the Bible study that I taught on Thursday night. I also taught the same thing on Saturday morning, so that if you miss it on Thursday, people could come on Saturday. Eventually I shut it down to just one day a week. But everything, for the most part, is traditionally the same way, with the exception that when strangers come in, I collect monetary transactions from them during that time for their time spent in here. But we still oftentimes will fellowship with them if we're given time, if we're not so busy that we can't. We'll still fellowship with them. And so one of two things is going to change at some point. We're either going to stop collecting monetary transactions during that time and just go with whatever happens, or we're going to just choose to be closed or something. Something's going to give, because Jen and I are both changing. Now she's more, as we've gotten busier, she's more looking towards, thinking we should take that time off, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to approach it.
How do you then focus on this commandment? Because it seems to me it's saying, I don't want you to do all these other things because I do want you to do what? He says, it says what not to do. What about what to do? You know what I mean? See, what are we supposed to be doing? You said enjoying what you have. How about, I was looking at worship. And he's trying to say, I want you to worship. Because I happen to know that Satan wants you to do one thing, and that's a negative. Not worship him, God. Not, I said, that's what Satan wants. All the other things he gets you to do are means to that end. Right?
Yeah. I haven't studied it, but I've heard several times over the years that, to answer Dave's question about what to do on the Sabbath, because oftentimes that's usually what we're discussing is what not to do. I've heard that the commentator perspective, which is not in the Chumash, I don't think, I'd have to double check, but the study that the rabbis have done first starts by recognizing, and this is concerning what to do, first starts by recognizing that the first initial commandment or instruction given about observing a seventh day and having that Sabbath is set apart for God and whatnot, immediately follows the first instruction is given about the building of the tabernacle. And so in their discussion, it's not just a discussion about, obviously, what to do, but it's also a discussion of what not to do, right? So there's additional discussion and chapters and stuff of what, not to do. But initially it comes from the idea of building the tabernacle. And I can't remember his name right now, but there's a rabbi that I sent Dave once I sent him a video of something to watch. It was a couple months ago. I can't remember that guy's name right now, but in listening to him in a different video that he had one time, I heard him make sense of the idea that, and it's going to be more my take of what I took from what he was saying, but basically what we should be doing is looking to create and build 6 days of the week, looking to create and build the spiritual places where we desire for his presence to dwell so that other people benefit from that. But on the Sabbath, we enjoy the benefit of shutting those facilities down, and we enjoy the benefit of fellowshipping with his presence.
Wait a minute, you're talking about physical, as opposed to he dwells in me.
No, I
He dwells in
was talking about spiritual.
him.
Yeah, I think
I was talking spiritually, regardless. So if
Yeah,
a combination of both. I'm talking about in the relationships. We strive. How do I put this in another sense? Some of us are much better at it than others. But all of us in this room probably at one time or another strive to help other people and to do things for other people. And as I said, some of us are better at it than others. But one real risk we should be mindful of is recognizing what it means sometimes to just take a break and sit down and enjoy the fellowship and enjoy the relationship, not only with God, but with those individuals. I'm not opposed to, I'm just going to use this as an example because I've had some discussion with him about it. Certainly none of us are going to be opposed to Dick's deciding to be the first one up out of his chair to make sure if we're running out of coffee that we have that coffee and we have that refill. But every opportunity that we have to alleviate or relieve a person who has consistent serving heaped on them, which I'm not saying this is necessarily Dick, but you understand where I'm going. Some people have such a servant's heart that we take advantage of them. And we allow for so much responsibility to be heaped on them that we don't put them in a position to be able to actually enjoy the benefit of that relationship. And that's one of the things that I know every church around here struggles with. I don't know how Mount Gilead's issue was with the coat drive this year, but I wouldn't be surprised at all to some extent that if with that event or with other events, they might have had a little bit of struggle from time to time here. They were trying to figure out who was going to volunteer, or was it all the same volunteers that volunteer every year to do the same work? Now, being that they have as many people that they do there, it may not be as much of an issue. But other churches around here that have 50, 60, 70 members have maybe the same 5 people that volunteer to do all the work every time there's a get-together. And as a community, it does us good to recognize, because there's a lot of risk that's involved in that, right? There's a lot of risk. The server,
We've got a real problem there. That's a real problem.
Yeah. The server is risking elevating the people and the work that he does of serving. He's risking elevating that higher than God and doing the work of serving so much just because he wants to satisfy himself and keep himself busy. I'm not trying to be mean, but I've had this conversation with Dick because I want to make sure for his sake, and I've had it with Joe because I want to make sure for their sake that to some extent they're not burning themselves out, because then they're good for nobody, right? And that's what their whole heart is. They want to be good for those around them. They want to be able to serve and do what they can. But you have to take a few moments here or there where you either say no or you sit back and you relax. And so part of my discussion today is for the rest of us to be mindful of those around us that are consistently doing that. Sometimes it's our job to almost, and in some cases this is what you'll have to do, is grab them and stop them and say, no, hold on a second.
I'm going to pour my own coffee.
Take a break, sit down. I know you don't want to. I know you want to keep moving. I know you want to keep doing something.
But I can do it better than them, remember?
But just take this moment.
I'm competent. I know how to do this.
But,
Let me do it.
Okay.
but the Lord, you know,
Yeah, take
God,
over. I know.
Hold on, guys.
God's telling us that we need to rest one day. So if it's Sunday,
You
if
can take
it's
calls.
Monday, if it's Thursday, if it's Saturday, we should rest one day.
No,
I'll
okay.
never be able to condone that.
No, all
It's
right.
not one day, it's the 7th day.
Okay,
It's
so,
the 7th,
yeah.
it's the Sabbath day. And
So,
that's the one he sets aside and
On
specifically
whose
says.
calendar? God's calendar or the Roman calendar or whoever invented our calendar?
At minimum,
The Roman calendar?
if there's going to be a consistent argument,
Whoever
Roman.
put the numbers on a calendar and said Sunday is the first day.
If there's going to be a consistent argument, when I have this discussion with people, this is what I've resolved for myself. If they're going to have a consistent argument of time and we don't know what the time is so they can do whatever they want, that's not true. You specifically have chosen to adhere to and admonish the exact same calendar you've grown up with in this society. So if I were to ask you to show me on a calendar what the first day of the week is, you're going to point to Sunday. And if I ask you to show me what the seventh day is, you're going to point to Saturday. That's what you are going to do. And you have spent all of your work life and all of your history and all of your time believing and focusing and functioning within the realm of believing that that is the seventh day. So you have a seventh day. The text here says that the seventh day is what's to be set aside. So whether to you it's at this particular time frame or what, hopefully it can become irrelevant. I mean, if you want to make it your Wednesday, fine. But God has specifically said that on the seventh day of the week, he is available for an extra, he's available all 6 days of the week, obviously. But on the Sabbath and on this particular time, he's more available and more intentionally preparing himself to be available.
So I have 2 points. See, I was taught that the first day was Monday and the seventh day is Sunday.
Who taught you that?
All the Baptists growing up. If you look at the calendars, like they always taught Monday was the first day, and that's where they got Sunday as their seventh day.
In our society, I've never seen any kind of.
But that's how I grew up.
That's
But
the way the calendar is.
no,
She's talking about the way they.
the way all of our calendars were always shown growing up, like even our school calendar, we started on a Monday because Sunday was the day of rest. But that's my point, though, is I have some Seventh-day Adventist friends who also believe that Friday to Saturday is the Sabbath day, and so, seventh day being Sabbath day. So the part that they always take on this guard, they always stress the word guard. Not the seventh part of it, not the day of it, not the rest part, but the guard part. That to them is the key to that entire commandment. Because God knew that people were going to change the day. So their whole religion structure is to guard that seventh day. Don't be swayed into believing it's Sunday. Don't be swayed into believing it's Wednesday. Guard that day because that's the day God made. But my argument with them is, well, I thought it was Sunday. Because I always grew up with Monday being day 1, Sunday being day 7.
So every pastor, most parishioners, most contemporary Christians don't know this or don't understand this, but most pastors or people that I've talked to will say that the reason why the Sabbath was changed or the reason why it's observed to be on a Sunday is because in the book of Acts it says that on the first day of the week they met in houses or they met in houses during this time. The text also goes on just 2 or 3 paragraphs later to talk about how on the Sabbath they also met in the synagogue every Sabbath.
Yes,
So-
they did. Same group of people.
So both are there, and so basically, yes, they met on the Sabbath, and they also met on the first day of the week. Christianity at one point, because of Constantine's rule and because of Constantine's change over the Roman rule, they decided to make Sunday, which already was a pagan practice and worship, they chose to make it that way. The Catholic Church came along and also took responsibility for this and said that St. Peter gave them, and here's the real clincher, because some of the Pentecostal churches around here I've heard put down Catholics, it just amazed me how little they understood about their same practice of Catholic ideas. But the Catholic Church says that St. Peter gave them the authority, and some of them believe that St. Peter gave the church the authority to change Scripture. And so this is why the Sabbath day was changed to Sunday.
Is
the
that the way
Catholic
they
Church-
say it, change scripture?
Yes, and the Catholic Church takes responsibility for it. And there are several different passages of things that you can find written by scholars over the centuries that do not agree with that, although they still hold to worshiping on Sabbath or on Sundays. And interestingly, this is where the custom came from for us. It was enacted initially centuries ago. We just continued to adopt it. And like I said, when I talk to most pastors, they tell me that this is still why they look at it, because on the first day of the week they met. For me personally, while I look at the time as from Friday night to Saturday night, I'm actually more than adequately fine, as most of you, with meeting on Sundays, with meeting on Wednesdays, with meeting on Friday mornings, with meeting on multiple days of the week. And I specifically think it would be better for our corporate, and by corporate I mean large groups of people, for our corporate gatherings publicly, I think it'd be much better to do them on Sunday, because then you are more in a position to do privately what you should be doing on the Sabbath anyway, which is meeting in your home with your family and maybe a couple neighbors here and there, because that's specifically in part what they did. Yes, they went to a synagogue, and yes, they had some service in the synagogue, but the rest of the time was also spent, the rest of the day was spent meeting with family, with friends, with whatever. So for those that, are in a position where, they're doing some kind of work function, or they're in a large troop, because we've got such large, population is so much different now than 2,000 some years ago, or even 5,000 years ago, obviously. So for such large churches where, I'm sorry, at the end of the day, we might all enjoy going to Mount Gilead services, and we might enjoy spending time there, seeing the presentations or the sermons that are preached, but the people that work there. That is a job for them. Some of them are paid, some of them are not, and it is a literal job and function for them where they aren't really getting fed as much by some of that spiritual stuff as the rest of the parishioners that come, because they are working a job the whole time they're there.
Don't say that.
Well, that's.
Don't judge what they're getting, because you're stepping into their shoes.
Well, I didn't say they're not getting any. I said they're not getting as
Getting
much
as much.
as what some of the other
And
parishioners.
that's, again, that's judgment. You don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I know what they're getting.
I can go two different ways on that. The people that's getting paid there, I can see that as being work. But the people, the volunteer people, they're giving. If you open the door and say hello, you're giving. You're not working. You're not getting paid for it. So that's a fellowship point.
As long as you don't look at that as oh man, I gotta go, I'm supposed to open the door, darn it. As long as it's not coming from that place,
Right.
then, but if it is, that's still work.
Then it's a chore.
That's a chore, and in my opinion, that's work. So, if you genuinely get up and you're like, you're there, you're excited, like you greet people here in the morning on Fridays,
Now,
that to you I don't think is work.
when I was in the Holy Land, I had a problem on one hotel. There was nobody to operate the elevator, the old-fashioned manually operated elevators. And one along the Caesarea, alongside the Gulf of, what's the lake there? Lake,
See Galilee?
yeah.
Yeah.
The elevator come in at the top floor. You come into the hotel at the top floor, and everything else was down. It never went up. You know what I mean? Because you come in to top, and it's built on a cliff at the bottom, down at the shore. That's where the hotel was, but you went into it up on this cliff. Boom, you come in and you went up. And we had a problem. I didn't know how to operate that elevator. There was a whole bunch of manual things on it. It wasn't just a hit the button.
Well, they want you to be
And
healthy.
there was
take
nobody
care.
there to operate it either. Why? Because it was Saturday.
Yeah.
They were worship. And they said, we don't work. And if we can't get any Arabs to come in here.
And so my only point is to emphasize the idea that regardless of whether or not you got paid for cutting down the tree at my house, had zero to do with the physical labor that was going to be required to do the work, right? Now you may feel differently about something you're getting paid for, which really is a risk of feeling less worthy about it, or caring or less caring about the actual quality of work that you put into it, as opposed to someone who volunteers and looks forward to adding themselves to what they're doing. But my point is just to simply state that when we have such a large corporate gathering and you're looking towards 1,000 people at minimum, coming together in a function, some people are going to find themselves in a realm where they're serving coffee, and maybe they're fed better than the parishioners that listen to the sermon because they interact with people all day long and they get fed greatly. But then you've got other people who spend their time doing nothing but working in a back projection room or running around making sure all the lights are turned on or all the cameras are working, and they interact with no one.
I never thought of that. It's true.
Okay? So
A lot of people there are working.
So to choose to have that corporate gathering to put together that time and that function is an event, right? It's an actual event, and it needs to be. And I know some people are opposed to things like the fog or the lights or the cameras, all that stuff going on the stage. None of that bothers me because that's all needed. You want people to be reached through the videography. You want them, if they're watching at home because they can't get out, to be able to see it clearly. The fog isn't there to put on a presentation. It's there to help diminish some of the lighting as it's going through with cameras, with the way they record, the stage. So as long as this is the effort that people put in, man, that is something that we should recognize, is it's an effort people have to put in, right? And to choose to be able to gather corporately on the first day of the week, because traditionally we don't normally work whatever job that we have, regardless of why people have chosen to take that time off. Most of us don't work, never work a job on Sundays. If you were required to, you had to. But
What do you think, I noticed that the lights, why do you think they do all that lighting stuff? Because I always thought that worship was to God. And is God impressed with those lights? And why do you think a church does that?
Keep your attention.
Keep my attention? No.
Well, not yours, but
It
young
distracts
people.
me,
Yeah.
matter of fact.
I agree with that.
It's to get the young people.
Yeah, brings young people in. That's what they are today. They're flashy and they're.
They gotta have fast attention, like they say the average teenager has an
You
8-second.
think they do, right?
Oh, I
Chuck E.
for
Cheese.
these.
Wait a minute. Have you evaluated it? You assume that to be so, and I know the elders there do too. I'm going to
Yeah.
talk to them about this. I'm not so sure that's true.
I don't know.
I don't know. You can't prove that that's true because I've asked them to test it. I'm going to ask them some more. I'm going to really push it with the elders. Okay, you've been doing this for how many years? 16. We've been in that building. 16 years? When they were 12-year-olds in there, you were doing this then, and today they're 28. How many of them still go to church and worship God? Do you know? In other words, how successful is what you're saying? Is it really true? How do you evaluate it? How do you evaluate
What
it?
if they moved out of town? Doesn't mean that they aren't worshiping God. They just moved houses.
That's
moved
true.
churches.
That's a true statement.
So-
I can't deny that it's true.
But to the point of the flashiness, like
Well, tell me that how many of them are still going to church?
go to a restaurant. Go to a restaurant and look out over a busy restaurant. I'm 40. I can sit in a restaurant without my phone. I can sit in a restaurant and just be in a restaurant by myself.
Okay.
Anyone under 30 cannot do that. You give them 5 seconds and they're almost like hyperventilating. They gotta have their phone, they gotta have TV, they gotta have something going on. And so I think that's what Dick and I are
In
trying to
other
get a
words,
point out.
you just proved my point.
They need something
They
to
need
keep
something
them-
other than God. They're idols.
Well, but at church,
My
it's
idol.
the
Where's my
same
idol?
thing. You wanna
I can't be without my idol.
keep them off their phone. Well, you gotta have a little flashy object up here.
yeah, for me, I don't.
What we're
Keep
doing
your
in
idol.
church is leading to that, is promoting that.
How?
We have,
Let's have all the lights and music you can have to take the place of these.
Yeah, but if it's promoting God, that's better than the phone.
we have
A little
lost,
bit, I guess you're right.
okay, real quick,
Because what's the result? Go ahead.
real quick. We have lost a lot of our youth that
We're
you're
using
talking
them
about.
all the time.
But they haven't left, okay? They're going to church. But a lot of them, Gilead parents have children that are going to a place like Emmanuel.
Yeah.
That have more flashing lights,
Oh.
more louder music,
Yeah.
and that's what's, now.
The
they're-
music
they're-
is not
they're-
to entertain God, it's to entertain the
Exactly.
people.
Yeah,
It is
keep
to
their
entertain
attention,
people, but
to keep their attention,
yeah.
yes. And I guess the
Is
way,
it working? Is it promoting
for,
Christ, or is our country going to pot?
Well, Emmanuel's getting people.
yes,
How many people do you think would get up on Sunday morning, go to church and sit down and they play the old hymns that you and I were brought up with?
With an organ.
And, yeah, with just an organ.
Okay, have you tried it lately?
I don't know any churches.
No, but
Then you don't know the answer to your own question.
Right.
I do know that there's quite a few churches in this area that are still regularly practicing it, and what I do know for sure is that those who don't like the lights, the noise, and the music also don't like or don't dislike it enough to have left and gone to one of those other churches.
They're dying, these old churches.
What a lot of them have done, when COVID came in, if you look at when COVID came in, the people that have not returned now, for a couple reasons, are seniors, have not all returned, but one of the reasons is they don't play through the music, or they silence the music, and they're there for the sermon. Okay, so they're getting.
You're talking about me again, see?
Yeah, no, I see
Yes,
you
you
up.
are.
I see you up there, sitting up there, going through the music.
Sometimes.
I
If
see
know
you
the
singing
music,
too.
If I don't, I sit down,
Yeah, and you sing through it too.
some of it.
All
You
right.
praise God.
We haven't got off
If
page
it- if
2
it's
yet.
praising
So
God.
apparently we're going to have a few weeks on this
Sorry.
study.
If it's praising
So-
somebody else next to me, I
But that's the whole point is the Seventh-day Adventists, they put the emphasis differently than you. Their emphasis is guard, and guard meaning to keep it on that day.
Well, they also believe the Sabbath to be, as you said at the beginning of the statement, from Friday to Saturday. So they do put emphasis on recognizing what the seventh day of the week is.
Mhm.
They just have learned, because they've studied some small end of Hebrew roots. I've been to a few different Adventist churches in Ohio, and they at least have studied to some extent. Usually the pastor is leading or teaching or something from some Hebraic perspective, and they've begun to understand the difference between Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, where the instruction to guard is given. I'll share with you guys something that I've shared before that some of you are going to argue about. Dave, again, is probably going to tell me to not be so risky about making judgments and assessments. But listening to you guys talk about this subject matter has just reinforced within me this teaching just so much more firmly. We have gotten so far confused in our contemporary Christianity about the difference between praise and worship that that's the only reason why we even have this problem. We have what we refer to as worship leaders up on the stage helping us to sing music. A worship leader should not be, one, even existing, and two, when you want to worship God, usually that is an action that can be done prostrate, which is you laying down face first on the ground and looking at nothing, because nothing should be getting between you and you getting in touch with God.
try looking right at the
So if you are trying to worship God, in my opinion, during a time that other people are praising God by singing songs, sharing some lights, playing some musical instruments, and you're struggling, then you have just simply put yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time to do what you're doing. Because there is a huge difference between worship and praise. Worship doesn't require a leader or anything in between you and God. It just requires you worshiping God and being humble and being prostrate. Praise is a creative way of being able to display thanks and appreciation
Yeah, that's good.
and show God what you think of him. And some people like to do that with musical instruments. Some people like to do it with lights. Some people like to do it with smoke and fog. So personally, I really think, man, churches would be much better off if they visited this and looked at it. Some of the kids that have left or maybe made a change in a church might have left that change because they heard of a lot of adults or a lot of elders consistently complaining about all the new lights and smoke and fog machines that were going up in the church, and they didn't like it because they thought it shouldn't be that way, and they thought it was taking away from their opportunity to worship God. And the kids might have been like, well, I must be doing something wrong because I like it. And that's just a real travesty. That's a shame. So there should be a very clear difference in our minds between a praise leader and a worship leader and what their requirements are and what they do. And if you need somebody to lead you in worshiping of God, then you have an issue. What you need is maybe a little bit of instruction, maybe a little bit of educating where someone draws out of you an understanding of how to worship and what that looks like. But to praise, we all need a praise leader, and there are some people that have the gift of being a praise leader, that know how to play that musical instrument. They know how to do a good job. They have a beautiful voice and a beautiful opportunity of singing. You know what's funny? One of my favorite artists, Christian artists, is Kim Walker-Smith, and we went and saw her several months ago. And I kept raising my hand during a special question and answer session we had paid a little extra for, whatever, to be backstage, and I kept raising my hand wanting to ask her this question, and I just never got a chance to. But somebody else, God had somebody else ask her a question that gave me my answer in part, and it was absolutely beautiful. I wanted to ask her, as not just a professional musician, but as a singer, what does she see as a difference between praise and worship? And what really was required? And I didn't want to spend a lot of time, take up her time trying to elaborate on this teaching. But I never got a chance to ask her, but somebody else asked her, get this, somebody else asked her, what do you do to prepare yourself before an event to sing? And here's what she said. God gave me this many, many years ago, and I still employ it regularly today. I lay down on the floor by myself with my head down on my stomach, and I exercise my diaphragm by breathing in and out and singing a few notes while I'm down on the floor. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks to listen to her give that answer and talk about that. Because God had put her, as she said, gave her that, God had put her in a position to be worshiping him before she would be out leading groups, large groups of people in praise. And that just struck me. And so this whole conversation just reinforces for me, man, we need to recognize the difference between the two. So,
I agree 100% with you. There's so much difference in praise and worship. Because worship we can do all the time. And praise we do publicly.
All right, I will read the rest of page 2, and then we will just say the next page for next week, which is good, and maybe any other topics we get into. Number 4, I'll reread. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Notice that this one commandment is given, one of 2 commandments, it gives its reward as well. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant, his female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. If you look at page 3 and the rest of it, you will see that the first 5 define our relationship to God. And again, somebody tell me, how does the 5th one define your relationship with God before it defines your relationship with people?
God gave us our penance. We had no choice.
That's right.
What now?
God gave us our penance. We didn't have a choice.
He chose to whom you'd be born, where you would be born, where and in what circumstances. He made that decision. And the last 5 define our relationship with others. And if you go into the next page, you'll see that they've been put together. So feel like reading through that. Either leave your paperwork here or take it with you, whatever you want to do. Any other last questions, comments, anything anybody wants to talk about? Dick?
You started out with talking about Steve walking through the store and getting grapes. If you walk through the store and you're hungry and you buy grapes, you eat one on the way, or even if you just pluck one off and eat it, is that stealing, or does the Spirit convict you?
It's stealing because they weigh it, and you ate one before.
You were gone away.
But
It's
you go
sample.
back to gleaning food from the corners of the thing. You're still stealing from that farmer, but he's supposed to leave you something for him. But
yeah, but the supermarket's not leaving you food.
what
They
I want
harvest
to get
it.
at is the convicting part. Does the Spirit convict you and make you keep thinking, man, I stole that grape. I shouldn't have done that.
And then I'll charge you for the water you flush down the toilet, or the napkins you use, or the free samples they give you. I mean,
Yeah,
I think it's all in your heart.
yeah,
Do
it's
you
the
feel like you're
conviction
stealing,
of
or
the Spirit.
Well, that was precisely what I said about that example earlier, is that some of us are at that level where that is what our personal growth and character refinement is about. We are challenged by the conviction of God's Spirit about, I need to stop doing that. I need to stop dealing with that issue. I listened in one of his teachings. I listened to Rabbi Kibbutz give an example of a young girl who had such a problem. This is a real life event. She had such a problem stealing sweets and just eating a piece of candy when she, or eating candy as she would walk to the store, that she'd already been arrested and convicted of it 5 times and was going to be facing jail time for having done it a 6th time. And this is how compulsive. It was just taking sweets, just eating candy, just stealing candy and eating it when she would go to the store. And this was such a compulsive, addictive behavior for her that he's a medical doctor, and his psychologist friend that had been working with her was dealing with, and this is a whole other subject matter, was dealing with how does he tell the truth and what was his requirement or what was his responsibility. Because he knew the truth could be that, yes, she does understand the difference. She knows the difference between right and wrong. Or he could also testify on her behalf that she had a mental disease and literally was not able to tell the difference between right and wrong. And the difference, and the difference for her would be how much time she spent in jail, and if she even went to jail. And the doctor was a Jew and was conferring with Rabbi Kibbutz about whether or not he should be telling the truth and what was required of him. If he should be trying to save the girl from the jail time that could kill her or could put her in a situation which was much worse, than this, or should he, what did he need to do?
What do you think?
No, you have to listen to the teaching.
That's the rest of the story.
Here's the killer.
Yeah.
One piece of candy that costs 5 cents. Or whatever. We'll put her in jail and it'll be $200 plus a day to house the person, feed them.
Worse than that, this was a foreign country. This wasn't like here. This was a place where if she went to jail, she could die.
Yeah.
This was much more serious. And he brings, Rabbi Kibbutz, it's in this discussion about free will, and he's talking about the utilization that man has of their free will and the problematic aspects of the idea that person B can have no divine decree over their life that God's going to kill them or take their life. This is one view. That person B has no divine decree over their life, they're going to die, but yet person A can still come around the corner and take their life and kill them. And there's a problem. There's an issue with this, right? This is an issue in the realm of our free will. But one of the things he brings out, which is just the struggle, is, if you try to ask someone who's on a diet and is, got a piece of little triangle of, chocolate with, cream on it, sitting on a plate in front of them, and they're struggling, and this is where their struggle is at. What are they going to do? Are they going to, choose this diet and this wonderful life of, losing the weight that they want to lose and having the image they want to have and having the health that they want to have, for this 5 seconds of creamy deliciousness that is going to be hours of guilt afterward? And then in the middle of this struggle, and 5 seconds later, they're looking at a plate that's completely licked clean. There's not one piece of chocolate left on it. This is a realm of where our free will exists that is very strange, because you have somebody on one hand, he tells another story. He's a medical doctor, man. Some of the stuff he tells about is fascinating. But he has another individual who they can get, there's a disease, I don't know if any of you have heard of this, called Berger's disease. And Berger's disease is somebody who has an allergic reaction to specifically nicotine. So only smokers are the ones that will contract this. But when they do, it causes all their limbs to either fall off or have to be amputated. And he had an individual who literally is facing life issues of this nature, who was so addicted and was so choosing with his free will to continue smoking that at one point when he comes into the hospital, he's going in to have one of his arms amputated.
He's still smoking.
And several months later, when he comes back again, or a few years later, when a TAP sees him again, he's had both legs amputated and has had somebody rig up a piece of wire to his wheelchair so that he can continue smoking as he's going to be wheeled in to have another arm removed. I mean, literally, people exert themselves in strange ways, the utilization of their free will, to do whatever they want to do. If you came around the corner and you saw somebody sweating profusely and having to carry a bunch of weights and having to, pick up and carry and move from one end of a room a bunch of other stuff, you would swear, this is another example he uses, you would swear that there was somebody right around the corner, holding a machine gun on them, forcing them to sweat out this blood, these tears, this whatever else, and this exertion. But no, this is an experience where it's somebody at Core Fitness who right around the corner is picking up weights and simply paying for this experience of being in a grueling, pain-stricken, environment where they're just working their body out because, again, this is a utilization of the will. We do strange things, and sometimes why we do it can't really be answered. We did it because that's who we are. That's literally who we are, is what we did. It's what that thing is. Anyway, thanks a lot for coming and putting up with me.